I've cleaned the museum at night for over a year, and I've seen my share of weird things. Drunk visitors sneaking in during events, kids hiding behind exhibits during lockup. But nothing prepared me for what happened last week. It started with a single piece out of place. A stone that had somehow rolled uphill on its display pad. By the time I realized the exhibits were moving, it was too late. I locked myself in the vault to survive the night, but one of them still found a way to follow me home. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. I read every single one. And, if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I'd passed the museum 100 times in daylight and never thought much about it. Just another stone-faced landmark squatting in the heart of the city, its marble columns streaked with soot, banners flapping over the entrance, advertising the current exhibit, Treasures of the Ancient World. But standing here at midnight, holding an envelope with no return address, and a job offer that barely made sense, the building looked different. Not like a place that welcomed visitors, more like it was waiting. The envelope had arrived 2 days earlier. No phone call, no application process. Just a single sheet of paper. Night maintenance, $4,500 per month. Start immediately. No experience necessary. Do not quit without notice. It included a start time, an address, this museum, and one extra line at the bottom in block capitals. Report to security office for instructions. No interview. No tax forms. And the pay. Ridiculous for janitorial work. Enough to cover 2 months of my rent in one check. I pushed through the front doors, the heavy glass giving way with a low groan. The lobby was cavernous, echoing my footsteps on polished marble. Dim safety lighting illuminated display banners and cast long shadows on the taxidermy diorama in the corner. Something about the air hit me first. Not musty like I expected, but faintly chemical, like a building preserved the way a body might be. The head of security was waiting in a cramped office just off the lobby. Mid-50s, stocky build, crew-cut hair gone silver. The brass nameplate on his desk read H. Carson. He barely looked up from the bank of monitors behind him as I stepped in. "You're the new hire," he said, not a question. "Yes," I answered, holding out the envelope. "Don't need that." He waved me off. "Lockers in the supply closet, first floor. Mop, broom, keyring. You'll find everything. Shift runs from 11 to 7. No outside visitors after closing. Keep your phone in your locker." He paused, studying my face like he was about to add something important. Then he slid a single page across the desk. It was handwritten, block letters, taped to a piece of cardboard. Rule 1. If you find an item out of place, return it exactly where it belongs. Don't ask who moved it. I read it. Twice. Is this a joke? His eyes didn't change. Follow the rules. You'll be fine. That was the full orientation. No mention of cleaning schedule, no safety brief, nothing about the actual exhibits. The supply closet was at the end of a hallway, lined with portraits of past curators, their eyes following me with the tired patience of oil paint. Inside, I found the basics: mop, bucket, cleaning cart. The locker door was already propped open, a key hanging from a nail inside. Someone had left a folded piece of paper on the shelf. It was another note, written in the same block capitals. Keep the mineral exhibit, lights on at all times. The mineral exhibit was 2 wings over, near the rear of the museum. I made a mental note to check it later. I started in the Ancient Civilizations Hall, towering glass cases of pottery, jewelry, weaponry, all labeled with neat plaques. The lighting here was low, with focused beams on each display. My reflection followed me in the glass, just me, the mop, the faint squeak of my shoes. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed one of the pedestal lights was out. When I leaned closer, I saw why. The glass case's side panel was slightly ajar. On the floor beneath it, an amulet lay on the tile, a copper disc etched with concentric rings. I bent to pick it up. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. I glanced up at the case. Inside, the empty spot on the velvet cushion seemed to be waiting for it. The rule flashed in my mind. Return it exactly where it belongs. I slipped the amulet back in place, closing the glass panel until it clicked. Curiosity got the better of me. I detoured to the security office. Carson was still at his desk, eyes on the monitors. "Quick question," I said. "Ancient Civilizations. One of the cases was open. Amulet on the floor." He didn't look at me. You put it back? Yes. Then it's fine. He turned a knob on one of the monitors, rewinding footage. I saw the camera view of the hall I'd just been in. The amulet was on the cushion, as it should be. Frame by frame, Carson stepped forward through the recording. And suddenly, it wasn't there. No movement, no person. Just there in one frame, gone in the next. No alarm had gone off. He stopped the feed. "You've got a floor to clean," he said, and waved me out. By 1 a.m., I'd worked my way to the natural history wing. Tall glass enclosures of taxidermy predators stood on faux rock displays. A wolf mid-snarl, a mountain lion crouched to pounce. I mopped carefully, my back to them, not wanting to knock anything over. When I turned, I froze. The wolf was facing me. I was sure its head had been angled toward the far wall when I walked in. I checked the base, heavy wood, bolted down. It couldn't have rotated without tools. I backed away, pushing the mop bucket toward the door. Halfway out, I glanced over my shoulder. The wolf's mouth looked a little more open than before. By 3 a.m., I'd decided not to mention it to Carson. I'd seen enough of his expression to know I wouldn't get an explanation. In the mineral exhibit, the lights were still on. Harsh white beams bouncing off quartz, amethyst, obsidian. The reflections danced on the polished floor, fractured by the facets of stone. I circled the room slowly, checking the bases. No glass cases here, just waist-high rails keeping visitors from touching the stones. I was nearly done when one of the display lights flickered. It steadied after a second, but in that moment, I thought I saw the largest quartz cluster shift. Not slide, rotate just slightly, like it was angling itself toward me. I stepped back over the rail to check my footing. When I looked again, it was still, exactly as it had been when I came in. At the end of the shift, I clocked out without speaking to anyone. The empty streets outside were washed in sodium orange light, the museum looming behind me. My first night on the job had been uneventful by any official standard. I'd cleaned floors, emptied bins, kept the lights on. And yet, I couldn't shake the image of that wolf turning its head, or the amulet lying on the floor without anyone touching it. Tomorrow night, I told myself, I'd pay closer attention. I'd see if the movement was real, or if I was already losing track of what belonged where in this place. I didn't know then that the museum itself kept track of me, and that the rules were more than just guidelines. Carson didn't say a word when I came in the next night. He slid the key ring across the desk without looking up. The monitors washed his face in alternating squares of gray. On one screen, the lobby sat still in low light. On another, the mineral hall burned white like an operating room. A third showed rows of mannequins from the historic fashion exhibit, all turned neatly to face the velvet ropes. I hesitated in the doorway. "Anything I should know for tonight?" "Same as last night," he said. Then, as if remembering an afterthought, "Don't whistle in the main hall." He didn't explain. I didn't ask. I started with the easy lanes, lobby, cafe, bathrooms, leaving the exhibits for when the building felt less like it was listening. The mop's rhythm helped. Push, draw back, rinse, push again. My reflection trailed me in the glass doors, an outline with a cart. At 12:40 a.m., I rolled the cart toward ancient civilizations, the corridor booming faintly with the echo of my wheels. The amulet case I'd fixed last night gleamed in its spotlight. The side panel was correctly latched, no gaps, no alarms. I angled my head to catch my own face in the glass. Its pale oval came back, slightly distorted by the curve. The air felt colder by the time I reached the mineral hall. The posted sign, "Please do not touch specimens," looked unnecessary at this hour. No one to touch anything except me. The lights were still on. I checked the little override box, tucked behind the entry arch. A strip of masking tape ran across it with a thick, permanent marker note. "Leave on." My note from last night, in different handwriting. Someone else had labeled redundancy into the building. I circled the quartz cluster deliberately and raised the mop, pointing. The stone stayed put. I waited long enough to be embarrassed by my own suspicion, then turned to wipe the stainless rail with a microfiber cloth. When I looked back, the quartz had not rotated. I exhaled through my nose. Okay. I finished the floor in even lanes, checked the drains, and glanced once at the control panel for the exhibit lights. A laminated card was taped beside it, the kind of ugly, practical sign only staff ever see. Mineral Hall lights. On 2300 to 0700, check breaker. If flicker, do not reset more than once per shift. I made a mental note of the breaker instruction. It felt like the building was handing me a thin rope over a dark space. At 1:25, I moved toward natural history with the mop bucket sloshing gently in front of me. The wolf stood where I'd left it. I approached until my shoulder almost touched the plexiglass. Up close, the taxidermy work was unsettlingly precise. Individual guard hairs, a blister of glue frozen like a tear at the corner of its gum line. Its eyes were glass, yes, but there was a thickness behind the lens, a depth, like the suggestion of a pupil that could shrink. I scraped gum from the baseboard and didn't look up again. Across from the wolf, the mountain lion's shadow reached farther than the light that made it. I pushed on. The historic fashion exhibit always struck me as stranger than the dinosaurs. Something about the mannequins, their blank faces and carefully posed hands, felt closer to imitation than display. The exhibit was set up like a stage, a long carpeted aisle, rope stanchions, and 10 platforms. Each platform held a different era's outfit: stiff Victorian morning black, a 1920s dress in pale gold, a post-war suit in dove gray. Each mannequin angled slightly toward the central aisle, as if sharing a secret among themselves. I Windexed the stanchion tops and followed my own rule: note placement. I scanned the line, blinked, and scanned again. The fourth mannequin, the one in the dove gray suit, seemed to have her chin up a touch higher than the others. I told myself I was inventing it. I checked the platform edges for scuffs, the little placard for dust, the floor for glitter shed from the 1920s beadwork. Back at the cart, I looked up at the security camera, its red status LED steady, not blinking, and gave it a little half salute I hoped Carson wouldn't see and interpret as sarcasm. I turned to leave. In the convex mirror mounted at the end of the aisle, the line of mannequins curved into a ghostly panorama. For a second, my stomach dropped. The fourth mannequin's head, only in the mirror, was slightly turned toward me. My heartbeat thudded in my throat. I stepped backward into the aisle, eyes on the actual mannequins, then back to the mirror. In person, each head faced dutifully inward toward the rope. In the mirror, the dove gray head had pivoted a degree farther, as if the reflection were ahead of reality by one frame. I stood there long enough to start feeling stupid again, then forced myself to finish the glass. On my way out, I noticed a folded index card tucked under the base of the time clock pedestal by the staff door. I crouched to pull it free. Block capitals, same hand as Rule 1. Rule 2, do not enter the West Wing after 3 a.m. Rule 3, do not whistle in the main hall. Rule 4, if the Mineral Hall lights go dark, reset once, only once. I slid the card into my pocket and checked my watch. 1:58 a.m. Back in the security office, Carson had a styrofoam cup balanced on the arm of his chair. He didn't look away from the screens when I knocked. "You left me a list," I said, holding up the index card. He glanced at it, then at me. "You found that on your own?" It wasn't exactly hidden. He took the card, read it as if confirming it hadn't grown new text, and set it on his desk. "Follow them," he said. "If a hall's dark, call me from outside. Don't go in." "Why not?" He finally gave me a look I couldn't read. "Because I said so." On the far left monitor, the historic fashion exhibit showed as a grayscale still life. 10 mannequins, 10 platforms. I watched the fourth one until my eyes ached. Nothing moved. I left before I asked a question I knew he wouldn't answer. At 2:20, the building made a sound like a faraway door closing. It was probably the heating system, or it was the building breathing. I told myself a lot of things. I took the back corridor past the staff break room and the education office. The posters along the wall showed smiling school kids holding clipboards under the banner, "Learning Through Touch." The irony wasn't funny at 2:20 a.m. I cut through the Mineral Hall to keep an eye on the lights. The quartz and amethyst looked like they were sweating. Condensation purled on the plexi edges of the information panels, though the air didn't feel humid. I checked the floor drains again. Dry. The lights flickered. Once. Back to steady. "Breaker," I said aloud to hear a voice. At the control closet, the main panel showed a row of green LEDs. One yellow blinked MIN-2. I toggled the reset. The light steadied to green. When I opened the closet door to leave, I stopped. Across the hall, 3 small agates on a display rail had aligned themselves in a perfect row, equidistant. I knew they hadn't been like that. Earlier, I'd noticed the middle one askew and had resisted the urge to nudge it straight, as if that would be crossing some boundary. Now all 3 were precise. "Okay," I said again, though I wasn't sure which part I was agreeing to. I returned to the cart and wrote MIN-2 reset once in a tiny spiral notebook I'd brought from home. Under it, I wrote, "Agates moved. Check later." By 2:47, I was back in ancient civilizations. I ran a dry cloth along the base of the mummy's cases and kept my eyes on my work. The glass over the sarcophagus showed a fog from the inside that hadn't been there before. I wiped the outside, knowing that wouldn't help and doing it anyway. The fog didn't clear. I angled my head to peer at the desiccated face within, half expecting, half dreading movement. The fog streaked down the inside of the glass, as if a finger had slowly drawn a line. I stepped back so fast, my heel hit the cleaning cart wheel and made it squeal. The streak was a straight vertical, no handprint, no smudge, just a line where nothing should have touched. The overhead lights brightened a notch. The streak remained. I backed out of the hall, leaving the cart where it was. "Don't enter the West Wing after 3, I told myself, as though the West Wing had anything to do with what was happening here. I made it back to the main hall at 2:58. The space was a cathedral of marble and shadow, the banners stirring in a breath I couldn't feel. The echo of my shoes returned to me a half-second delayed, a polite mimic. I caught myself humming under my breath, the nervous habit of someone trying not to hear the building. Without thinking, my hum turned into the first 2 notes of a whistle. I stopped instantly, as if I'd been caught swearing in church. No whistling. I checked my watch again. 2:59. 1 minute to the time the card had warned me about. I decided to be in motion instead of waiting for a minute to end. I took the side corridor toward historic fashion. Halfway there, the building's low-frequency hum dipped. Lights lowered a fraction, as if the building were inhaling. When I stepped into the exhibit's aisle, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not dust. Something like starch and mothballs, sharp in the back of my throat. 10 mannequins, 10 platforms. I walked the rope lines slowly. Each mannequin stared past me toward the center, hands in everlasting gestures, gloves held at the hips, fingers poised above a clutch, a paper fan caught mid-arc. I tried to match their stillness with my own, as if not to offend. At the end of the aisle, I turned to check the convex mirror again. All 10 bodies curved together in the fisheye view. The 4th mannequin's head, dove gray, was where it had been. My jaw unclenched. I glanced down at the placard on the 8th platform, a post-war day dress described in small text. When I looked up, the 4th mannequin was gone. Not turned, not misaligned, gone. The platform was empty. My breath stuttered. The ropes hadn't been disturbed. The carpet showed no scuff. I scanned the aisles and then the mirror, my eyes snagging on a pale oval near the exit. The dove gray mannequin stood beside the door, angled toward the corridor as if waiting to be let out. I forced air into my lungs, slow, mechanical. "Carson," I said aloud, though I didn't have the radio in my hand yet. "Carson, you watching this?" The radio crackled at my hip as if it had been listening too. I fumbled it up and pressed the side button. "Security, this is, maintenance, fashion hall. One of the mannequins moved. Static." Then Carson's voice, flattened by the speaker. "Do not approach. Copy?" "Copy, but stay where you are," he said. "I'm on my way." I kept my eyes on the mannequin at the door. It didn't move. The posture was the same as on the platform. One hip slightly forward, hand posed with an invisible clutch. The chin the same impossible angle mannequins always wear to mimic elegance. Only the location had changed. From behind me came a faint sound. Fabric brushing fabric, the kind of whisper made by sleeves touching in a crowded closet. I turned my head a fraction. The 9th mannequin had shifted an inch toward the aisle. "Carson," I said, not lifting my finger off the talk button now. 2 minutes, he replied. "Do not whistle. Do you hear me? Don't whistle." "I'm not." I stopped myself from being petty about technicalities. I hear you. A soft click sounded by the exit as the motion sensor caught something it shouldn't have. The door didn't open. Of course it didn't. It was magnetically locked at night, but the red status LED over the frame flickered to green and back to red, like someone had a hand on the handle from the outside. I eased backward, matching my breathing to my steps. My shoulder blades prickled. I refused to look at the 9th mannequin again. I kept the door mannequin in my peripheral vision, the way you keep a dog you don't know in the corner of your eye. Carson appeared in the corridor, his silhouette cutting the spill of light. He raised a hand in a stop sign, then stepped around the corner as if approaching a skittish animal. His eyes flicked past me to the empty platform, then to the figure at the door. "Don't speak," he said softly. "Back up." We moved together toward the middle of the hall. He pressed something small into my palm without looking down. A key, longer than the others on my ring, old-fashioned with a bit at the end. The metal was worn smooth. "If the lights fail," he murmured, "breaker room only once. If any case fogs, leave the room. If West Wing doors are open after 3, close them and leave. Do not look inside." "You said not to go." He kept his eyes on the mannequins. "I know what I said." The radio at his shoulder hissed, then popped. A different voice, thinner, said, "Main hall sensor shows motion near West Corridor." Carson's jaw tightened. "Copy, seal it," he said, then to me, "Mineral Hall lights steady?" "For now, keep them that way." The dove-gray mannequin's head angled slightly. I would have sworn it. Carson didn't react, which made me wonder if he hadn't seen it or if he'd seen worse. He moved toward the door in a slow arc, giving the mannequin space like a courtesy. When he was within arm's reach of the handle, he took the long key from me and slid it into the old lock below the modern mag strip. The key turned with a soft interior click. I felt more than heard, like a notch falling into place in my ear. The mannequin pivoted. Not fast, nothing dramatic, but without friction, as if a platform under its feet had rotated. The motion stopped with its face toward him. Carson exhaled through his nose. "Right," he said, almost conversational. Then he opened the door a hair, pulled it shut with 2 fingers, and turned the key back. The red LED held steady. We stood there listening to the quiet we'd forced back over the building. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out. "Go finish your rounds," he said, as if any of this had been normal. "And don't whistle," I finished. He took one last look down the aisle of mannequins and left without another word. I waited, counting silently to 20. When I looked back at the door, the dove-gray mannequin was no longer there. She was on the empty platform again. Except it wasn't her. The dress was different. Same platform, new era. A Victorian mourning figure stood where the dove-gray had been, heavy skirts swallowing the base, black veil pinned over a blank face. I looked at the placard. The text had changed. Different font, different curator's credit line, as if the exhibit had swapped pieces in the span of a minute and the signage had followed like obedient script. I didn't radio Carson. I didn't move closer. I just wrote, in my spiral notebook, with a hand that shook enough to make the words cramped, 259 to 308. Mannequin moved. Then exhibit swapped. Same platform, different piece. In the convex mirror, 10 figures curved together. None of them were looking at me. Behind me, somewhere deep in the building, a breaker thumped. The lights in the mineral hall flickered and then held, for now. The clock on my watch turned over to 3 a.m., and from far down the west corridor, where the staff door shouldn't have been open, came the softest sound a building can make, a hinge deciding between closed and not. By my 3rd night on the job, I'd stopped expecting answers from Carson. He handed me the keys without comment, barely nodding when I asked if the mineral hall lights had been steady during the day. "Only went out once," he said. "Breaker worked. Remember the rule." I remembered. Reset once. Only once. I made my usual loop. Lobby, restrooms, cafe. Nothing out of place except a chair in the cafe, turned at an odd angle, as if someone had been sitting there, knees to the table after closing. I straightened it and told myself I was being jumpy. When I passed the security office again, The monitors caught my eye. One showed the west corridor, the stretch leading to the wing I wasn't supposed to enter after 3 a.m. The image was dim. A strip of yellow tape crossed the double doors, the kind used for "do not cross" at renovation sites. Only one problem. I'd been down that hall earlier in the week to empty trash. There had been no tape then. By 1:15, the mineral hall lights flickered. Not a full outage, just a quick dip, like a breath being held. I reset my pace, reminding myself to check the breaker on my way back. The taxidermy wolf was where it belonged. I'd started giving it a silent nod whenever I passed, a superstition I couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. In historic fashion, the mannequins were all on their platforms. The dove gray suit was in place. No empty platforms tonight. Near the breaker room, a folded sheet of paper was tucked into the handle. I pulled it free. Same block capital handwriting. If West Wing doors are open, close them. Do not look inside. It wasn't signed. There was no "after 3 a.m. on this one. I pocketed it, telling myself I wouldn't need it. The breaker reset on MIN-2 took. Lights steady. When I stepped back into the corridor, a draft moved past my face. Impossible in this sealed, climate-controlled building. It came from the west corridor. The yellow tape on the double doors hung loose at one end, torn away from the frame. The doors were slightly ajar. I should have called Carson. I didn't. Instead, I walked slowly down the corridor. The air was cooler here, tinged with something like wet stone. The museum's wings were usually labeled with placards and exhibit titles. This corridor had none. The lights above were older, buzzing faintly. The tiles underfoot were original to the building, narrow, uneven, with a dark seam down the center. The left door stood open enough for me to see a slice of the room beyond. The beam of the hallway light didn't reach far, but it hit the base of a glass display case. Inside was something dark and metallic, about the size of a human torso, mounted on a low pedestal. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't lit. The metal looked wrong, not rusted, not polished, but faintly shifting, like light through oil. The longer I stared, the more it seemed to pulse. A sound made me step back. Not loud, just the faint scrape of something moving against tile deeper in the wing. The air shifted again, a draft that seemed to come from the object itself. My hand found the door handle. I pulled the door shut until the latch caught and pressed the loose strip of tape back in place. The seam in the tape didn't match anymore, but it was the best I could do. Back in the mineral hall, the quartz cluster faced the same direction as always. The amethyst geode looked unchanged, but the small agates I'd seen moved the night before were missing entirely. Their velvet display pad was bare. I scanned the floor, the cases, the information panels. Nothing. On my next pass by security, Carson was watching the west corridor monitor. The double doors were closed, the tape dangling loose on one side. "You didn't go down there, did you?" he asked without looking at me. "No," I lied. He leaned back. "If you see those doors open again, call me. Don't try to be a hero." "What's in there?" His eyes flicked to mine for a second. "Things that don't belong anywhere else." At 2:45, I was dusting the display rails in the Ancient Civilizations wing when the building's low hum shifted. Not like before. This time, it was layered, a vibration I could feel through the soles of my shoes. The nearest glass case, a display of clay idols, trembled slightly. The largest figure, a squat-bodied thing with too many eyes, had been in the center of the row when I walked in. Now it sat at the far right, facing the end of the case instead of forward. I stepped back and checked the case lock. It was sealed. The vibration deepened, then stopped. Every hair on my arms was standing. When I returned to the west corridor 20 minutes later, the tape was gone entirely. The double doors stood wide. From where I stopped, I could see the metallic object clearly. It was no longer centered on its pedestal. It leaned toward the door, just enough to notice. On the tile floor beneath the pedestal were 3 small agates. They were arranged in a perfect triangle, points aligned toward the hall. The sound came again, the slow scrape of something heavy repositioning itself. I turned to leave, but movement in the glass of a nearby display case caught my eye. A reflection, not of me, but of something tall and narrow standing just behind the object. I didn't turn to confirm. I walked, keeping my pace steady, until I was back at the main hall. At 3:01, Carson's voice came over the radio. "Where are you?" "Main hall," I said. "West doors are open. Your tape's gone." "Stay there." It took him less than a minute to appear, moving fast but quiet. He didn't look at me as he passed, just went straight down the corridor. I couldn't see what he did in there. He shut the doors before the light could spill in. When he came back, his face was set. "From now on, you don't even go near that corridor after midnight. Clear?" I nodded. "Good," he said, and walked away. That night, as I was leaving, I glanced back through the glass entrance doors. The museum was dark except for the mineral hall, glowing faintly white at the far end of the lobby. And there, at the edge of that light, something stood just beyond the hall's arch, too far to see clearly, but close enough that I could make out the faint glint of polished stone. It didn't move, not while I watched. The storm outside started just before my shift. Heavy rain against the roof, the occasional rumble from the old gutter system, nothing unusual for the city. Inside, the museum felt tighter than usual, like the air had less space to move. Carson was in his office when I came in, leaning forward toward the monitors. He didn't look up when he handed me the keys. "Mineral hall first," he said. "Lights flickered twice during the day." "Breaker once, right?" I asked. He nodded. "Only once." The mineral hall was silent, except for the faint buzz of the lights. Every stone was where it should be, except for one. A small rose quartz sphere had rolled to the very edge of its velvet pad. It shouldn't have been able to roll at all. The pad was level, and the edges were high enough to keep the stones in place. I set it back in the center and stepped away. The overheads flickered, once, twice, 3 times. I checked the breaker. Min 2 was solid green. No reason for the flicker. When I stepped out into the main hall, the banners hanging from the ceiling were moving. Not a slow sway from air currents, but a rhythmic pulse, in sync with each other, like someone tugged the ropes in a measured pattern. The security radio on my hip crackled. "Breaker room," Carson's voice. "I'm by the main hall," I said. Silence for a few seconds, then, "Stay there. Do not." The line cut out in a burst of static. I turned toward the ancient civilization's wing. The glass over the sarcophagus from earlier was fogged again, this time almost entirely opaque. From somewhere deep in the museum came the sound of something heavy shifting. Not one piece, but many in quick succession, as though a row of display cases had been dragged an inch. The overheads dimmed, not off, just down to a sickly, low-wattage glow. The mineral hall went completely dark behind me. I moved toward the security office. Carson wasn't inside. The monitors flickered with static. In the brief moments the image stabilized, I caught glimpses. A mannequin from historic fashion, standing in the main hall, half-shadowed. The wolf in the natural history wing, not in its enclosure. The west corridor doors standing open. A loud metallic snap came from my right. I turned to see the dinosaur skeleton in the natural history wing shudder, vertebrae clinking together. Its skull had lowered slightly, jaw half open. I backed away. From the mineral hall archway, 2 of the smaller geodes rolled out into the main hall. They wobbled to a stop, perfectly aligned with each other. The overhead lights flickered again, and the space filled with movement. The mannequins weren't teleporting this time. They were walking. Not smoothly, joints weren't made for that, but with stiff, forward-tilting steps. 2 of them moved into the main hall from historic fashion, splitting apart to block the corridor behind me. From the natural history wing, the wolf's claws scraped against marble as it padded forward. The sound was wrong. Too heavy, too deliberate. Behind me, something thudded against the floor. I glanced back to see the Victorian morning mannequin had leapt down from its platform. The radio at my hip hissed, "Breaker room." Now. I didn't ask questions. I ran. The mannequins followed, their stiff footfalls rapid now, echoing off the high ceiling. The wolf's claws skittered on the marble, gaining speed. I reached the breaker room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The panel glowed faintly green across the board. All systems normal, which meant nothing was normal. The door handle rattled once, twice, then stopped. From somewhere above, the faint rattle of air vents shifted into a deeper, heavier sound, like something crawling through them. I stepped back from the door just as a metallic clang rang out from the panel. The Mayen 2 light turned red. I flipped the breaker. The hall lights outside surged back on, and that's when I saw them through the small, reinforced window in the breaker room door. Half a dozen mannequins standing perfectly still, shoulder to shoulder, facing the door. In front of them, the wolf sat with its head tilted. The mineral stones, the small agates and the rose quartz, were arranged in a circle at their feet. The lights dimmed again. Not a flicker this time. A slow, deliberate fade. I heard a distant crash as something large fell in the west wing. A second crash came closer, in the mineral hall. The mannequins stepped forward as one. I unlocked the door on instinct, thinking I could dart past before they closed in. They didn't sprint, but they were faster than they should have been. I slipped between two of them, their porcelain fingers grazing my jacket. The wolf lunged. Its jaws clamped shut inches from my arm as I ducked past. In the main hall, the banners were still moving in that steady pulse. I ran toward the only place in the building I knew had a reinforced door, the archival vault upstairs. Halfway there, a marble statue from the Renaissance wing was standing in the middle of the stairwell. It hadn't been there when I'd come in. Its carved hands were outstretched, blocking the way. Behind me, the mannequins and the wolf advanced. From the side corridor, the dinosaur skeleton's skull appeared, turning with an audible creak to face me. The west wing doors at the end of the hall were wide open now. Inside, in the dark, I saw that metallic object, the one that had been pulsing, moving off its pedestal. It was being carried, slowly, by nothing I could see. The lights cut completely. In the dark, I could hear it. The wolf's low growl, the mannequin's joints clicking, the heavy, slow scrape of the dinosaur skeleton's feet, and beneath it all, the faint hum I'd first felt through the floor, now vibrating up through my shoes, into my legs. I turned and ran for the stairs. The marble statue was gone from the stairwell, but halfway up, something heavy hit the steps behind me. The dinosaur's skull slammed down onto the railing, splintering it. I reached the vault, shoved the key into the lock, and spun the wheel. The reinforced door swung shut, just as something hit the other side, hard enough to rattle the frame. Inside the vault, the hum was softer, but still there. I sat on the floor, breathing hard, listening. Every few seconds, there was movement outside, a scrape, a thump, a sound like porcelain fingernails on steel. The lights inside the vault flickered. Somewhere above, the ventilation system groaned. A faint metallic smell drifted in. I looked up. The grate over the vent was trembling. I don't know how long I stayed in the vault. The hum outside rose and fell like a slow breath. Occasionally, something brushed the door. The hollow sound of a palm, the sharp tap of a claw. At one point, I heard glass shatter in another wing. It didn't stop after one crash. More followed, irregular and distant, like the building was being pulled apart piece by piece. Sometime after 4, the radio on my hip hissed. "Stay where you are," Carson's voice said. Then silence. I didn't answer, wasn't sure he'd hear me if I did. The hum began to fade after that. The tapping stopped. When the lights inside the vault flickered back to steady, I unlocked the door and stepped out. The main hall looked wrong. Banners hung crooked, their ropes frayed. Display cases stood at angles, some empty, some shattered. The mannequins were all back on their platforms in historic fashion, but their positions were different. Every head turned to face the hall. The wolf lay inside its glass enclosure again, eyes forward. But the glass was cracked, a hairline fracture running from top to bottom. In the mineral hall, every stone was back on its pad, arranged perfectly. Except for the rose quartz sphere. It was missing. I found Carson by the front doors. He was leaning against the frame, staring out at the rain-slicked street. "You all right?" he asked without looking at me. "I think so." "Good," he said. "You're done here." I thought he meant for the night, but when I came back the next evening, a different man was at the desk. He didn't know who I was, said the janitorial position had been filled weeks ago. I tried to find Carson, but no one by that name was listed in the employee directory. 2 days later, I went back during public hours. The main hall was spotless. Cases were straight. Glass was whole. The mannequins were posed differently again. All heads forward this time, nothing unusual to a casual visitor. The mineral hall lights were steady. The rose quartz sphere had returned. I stood there staring at it until a security guard asked if I needed help. That night, I woke to a faint hum in my apartment. It wasn't coming from the fridge or the pipes. It was deeper, more deliberate, the same vibration I'd felt through the museum's floors. When I checked the corner of my living room, the air felt colder. Sitting in the middle of the rug was a small rose quartz sphere. I didn't touch it. It's still there now, and every so often, just before the lights in my apartment flicker, it shifts a fraction of an inch.